When it comes to self-development and integration, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. Welcome back to the Vital Point Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. As a breathwork facilitator and integrative specialist, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. What I wanted to talk about today was my year in Tibet. And sometimes I have wondered why I haven't talked about this on the podcast very much. And it first really came up for me a little over a year ago when I did my first interview with David Nichtern. I just remember being like, oh yeah, how come you don't talk about this on the podcast? This is a part of your life. This is a part of your integration. And in my mind, it's a piece of the puzzle that is very important. And then a year went by and I still hadn't really talked about it, and had another interview with David, and I remembered. I came back. I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that. As I was getting episode 100 ready and I had a bunch of ideas and different things that I wanted to do, this is what I landed on, and I hope you enjoy it. I sat down last night and I did some journaling, and I really gave it a lot of thought as far as what I wanted to share about that year in Tibet. Just for context, it's almost a year from 2005 to early 2006. And I'll give you some more of how I got there in a little bit. So it's been a while, obviously, right? So a lot of time has passed since then. And I've gone through different sort of chapters as far as relating to that year and what it meant to me and the after effects, the ripples that year created. And that was a lot of what I sat down and was writing about last night. Was what did I want to share about? I don't want to just get on here and tell you cool stories about Tibet, which, by the way, I totally could. And if that's something that's interesting to you, please let me know. I'm happy to share some more about it, maybe do some future episodes, but I also wanted to keep the episode on brand and on topic as far as how that experience fit into my own integration. So if you want just the cool, amazing stories, let me know, send me an email, send me a comment, tell me that that's something that you're interested in, and we can make that happen. But as I sat down and I was thinking about it, and here, we're almost 20 years past this experience. But what came up for me as I reflected on it was how that time in my life was really the beginning of was being exposed to a transpersonal dimension of life. Buddhism kind of came out of nowhere for me. It came right after one of the first transpersonal experiences that I can remember. And, transpersonal psychology is something we've talked about on the podcast a bit. Definitely go back and check out the 2 episodes with Katrina Michelle if you are wanting some more deep diving on the topic of transpersonal psychology. The episode with Otto Meyer is another one that comes to mind as far as the focus on the transpersonal. But yeah, Buddhism kind of came out of nowhere for me, but it was introduced to me in this transpersonal way where I was sitting there sort of examining it and not having a lot of overthinking because of the way that I experienced it, because it did defy logic and science and any sort of rational explanation that I could come up with, I think that I had more faith. I didn't question, I didn't second guess myself, I didn't overthink, because I already had this evidence, right? So without going too far off tangent, but just to, give you an idea of where my head was at the time, I was working for an insurance agent. I had stopped doing sales, but I was doing account management. I worked in the jewelry district in downtown LA, and my paternal grandmother passed away, and I was there when she passed away. And I don't know if I have the words to describe that. I still have a very strong image in my mind of that event, but it defied logic and it defied what I knew about reality. And so that was kind of interesting. And then a couple of days later, and during these couple of days, I could feel her. I could feel her with me. And I didn't really understand that either. But a couple of days later, I was in a bookstore with my mom. And at the time, I did not read anything but fiction, mainly science fiction, fantasy. I was obsessed with this writer named Michael Moorcock. And that was actually why we were in that bookstore, was they had like a lot of older sort of first editions and rare books. And Michael Moorcock has published over 100 books. A lot of them are, smaller, sort of pulpy paperbacks and things that weren't widely published. So that's why I thought I was in that bookstore. I'm walking down the hall and I felt my grandma, I felt her spirit. I felt her put her I felt like a hand like stopping me on my chest. And I had this very clear message to go down this aisle. And I went down the aisle, and it was all books about spirituality. And I sort of stopped right in front of the Buddhist books and pulled out this book that I actually have on my bookshelf here. If you're watching, Awakening the Buddha Within by Lama Surya Das. And I picked it up and I started to read it right there in the store, and it was really making sense to me, but I was also trying to sort of figure out what was happening, because like this sort of spirit had guided me to this book. And here's how skeptical I was initially. I didn't even buy the book that day, was my recollection, because I worked so close to the Central Library in downtown LA. I was like, I'll just go get it from the library. And that actually led me into a really cool direction, because that library had a whole floor of books on spirituality. And there literally were way more books about Buddhism at this library than in that bookstore, or really any bookstore that I've ever been in. And I just started voraciously devouring books on Buddhism. I got completely obsessed with Buddhist practice. And the thing that initially hooked me was one of the first things I had read in Awakening the Buddha Within, which was, don't believe anything in this book, even if the Buddha said it. Don't believe anything that you're reading or that somebody's telling you. Go out and have your own experience. Go out and experience it for yourself. Like, go test it if you think something's true. And that really appealed to me. That was the opposite approach to growing up Jewish. And so from that first moment, I was really hooked. And I kept going to different meditation groups and just really trying to learn. And I, like I said, I got really obsessed, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. At that point, I worked in insurance, but I was also an aspiring DJ. I would call it semi-professional. Like, I did have some paying gigs. Obviously, it was also, a hobby, but I really wanted it to be my profession. And then as I got into meditation, I stopped being interested in pursuing this path to being a professional DJ. Meditation started to show me how unhappy I was in my life, how unhappy I was drinking all the time. It started to show me the ways in which my behavior, the person that I was acting like, how I didn't like that, and I wanted to change. At one point, and again, I'm skipping some time because I don't want to go too far off tangent here, but I decided I wanted to do a 3-year long retreat, which is traditional in the lineage of Buddhism that I continue to practice. And that aspiration led me to upstate New York, staying with my grandfather on his farm in a very rural area, which in my mind was like, cool, I can help him out. He needed some help around the farm, recovering from a surgery. But I also had all this time and to practice. The process for doing a 3-year retreat, there's a lot of preliminary work and meditation and stuff that you have to do. So I needed the time and space to do that. And that was my goal going out there. And at a certain point, I went and talked with one of my teachers and, sort of checked in and said, hey, I just want to check in about this 3-year retreat thing. And am I on the right track? Do you have any advice? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, that's a interesting idea, but I have a better one for you. I think you should become a translator. And I kind of went, I don't know how to do that. I don't have any money for that. I wouldn't know how to take the first step, but I'm open to the idea. And he said, oh yeah, you don't really need money. Just, we'll send you to Tibet. You can go teach English. You'll learn Tibetan. Then you'll go over to India to this translator training program. It's 2 years. You get a stipend while you're there, which appealed to me because I wasn't flush with cash at that point. And so without really thinking about it, I said, okay, sure, that sounds great. So there was like the first example of like not really doubting or overthinking, just really trusting that that was what was supposed to happen. Again, I want to keep this about my integration. So when I think back on the experience, one of the things that comes up for me again and again is this question of faith. And maybe faith isn't entirely the right word, but fearlessness. I just had no fear. I had no doubt. I didn't sit there and overthink any of it. I just kept going. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Like I went and got a job at a coffee shop so that I could have some traveling money. And the other thing about this faith, this fearlessness, whatever you want to call it, when I look back on it, there was a lot of youthful naivety. I did some things that I would definitely second guess now, as far as taking care of my visa, as far as, just sort of the risks that I took, or the things that I wasn't conscious of, the unhealed things that were driving some of my decisions. So I went over there The plan was that we were going to teach English at this school in a city called Xining, and I was going to find a tutor and study. I initially wanted to go to my main teacher, Garchen Rinpoche's monastery, but when I went, they said, "Look, there's already a teacher there. So what about this other plan?" And I said, "Okay." Now, this is a neat part of the story. That same teacher that had suggested that I become a translator, I got to spend some time with him before we went, and I actually went over there with him. One day we're going to lunch, and he looks at me and he says, "Hey, do you like girls?" And I'm like, "What? This is a strange question for a Tibetan monk, teacher to be asking me." And I kind of looked at him strange, and I said, "Like, as opposed to boys? Sure." And he looked at me and kind of laughed, and he said, "I think when you go to Tibet, you're going to meet a nice girl." And I literally just burst out laughing. And I'm like, "What? I want to do this 3-year retreat. I'm not trying to get into a relationship. I'm not really thinking about that. That's not what's on my mind at this point, right? Like, I'm trying to let go of that stuff so that I can go be in retreat for 3 years." And he just, kind of kept laughing. He's like, "No, I think you're going to meet a nice girl when you're over there." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." Just didn't really even give it much thought after that. I just thought he was joking around or something. He wasn't always serious. Well, I learned this later on. But, I met him, and I met the 2 other people that had signed up to go on this particular trip. We met in the airport in Seoul. They flew out of Los Angeles. I flew out of New York, and we met in the airport in Seoul. There were 2 Americans, like I mentioned, a man and a woman. The woman sat next to my teacher on the plane. And as they're on the plane, he looks at her. I heard the story later. He looks at her and he says, I have this picture. Do you want to see this picture?" And it was a picture of him and I together. And I'm actually looking at the picture right now. I have it up on my altar. And she kind of, what she told me was, she kind of looked at it and was like, "Yeah, okay. Yeah. There's a nice picture." And he goes, You like this boy? He's a nice boy." And she's like, "Yeah, okay, whatever. Yeah, he's a nice boy." So keep that in mind, because it's important to the story. It's important to the whole sort of transpersonal aspect that I wanted to share in this episode. When we got there, things were not exactly as smooth as they had told us it would be. There were some complications with the school and them wanting us to teach there. So we're just going to sort of skip over that story. But there was the 3 of us, right? These 3 Americans in Xining together, trying to figure things out. Both myself and the woman were not really too fond of this other guy. He was kind of annoying, and we ended up starting to hang out together because we were annoyed and didn't want to hang out with him. And one thing led to another, and, we started hooking up and started to have feelings for each other. And it's almost like that Tibetan Lama knew something that we didn't know. Go figure. Anyway, things continued to progress. She ended up deciding to go back home. I wanted to stay because I had a mission. I also didn't have a whole lot of money, so I had sort of less flexibility with my options. And so she left, and then one day I get this call, and they're like, "Hey, do you want to go to the monastery and teach? We need a teacher." And I jumped at it. I was like, yeah, this is why I went. This is my original plan, right? So I ended up spending the majority of that year, and certainly the remainder of that time, in Garchen Rinpoche's monastery in Kham, which is Western Tibet, in a very remote area, about 3 hours drive from the nearest sort of civilization. No running water, no electricity, somewhere between 12 and 13,000 feet elevation. So it was a pretty extreme experience and a really beautiful one. You got to keep in mind also, as far as the context for all this, like there were no iPhones. There weren't even iPods. Like I took a CD book. Remember those wallets that we used to put our CDs in? I took a CD wallet with me and a CD player, and I had a limited amount of batteries because I was out in the sticks. So even music was like a luxury that I indulged in maybe once or twice a month. And most of my days consisted of meditation, journaling. I decided I was going to write a autobiography, but also it turned into just sort of a processing exercise. But doing a lot of meditation. And it was beautiful. I processed a lot. That area of the world for meditation was intense. It's very, very powerful energy. You know, here's this place where people have been doing spiritual practice for a long time. And I got used to seeing things and experiencing things that didn't make any sense. They didn't make any sense logically or thinking about some sort of, base reality, things like seeing footprints in rock, seeing handprints in rock, seeing things moving on their own. In addition to a whole lot of other things, just sitting down to quote unquote meditate there, you would just drop into a really, really deep state really fast, just from the energy in the area. And it was a really incredible experience. I got to travel to some really, really remote areas that honestly probably never happen again. And not something that you would encounter even going over there or, working with like a tour guide. Like these, I was embedded with people that live there and, got to go to some really crazy places, like crossing wooden bridges over raging rivers and, times where they're like, hey, you need to walk over this bridge because it's not going to hold up the Jeep's weight. Or, going on horseback into these super, super remote villages, just wild, wild stuff. And I had a year-long visa. And at the end of the year, I came back to a computer and sat down and started to try to work through the next part, the next phase. And basically, long story short, was told, you don't qualify for this program and you need a few more years of study and here's what you should do. Best of luck. And I think here is one of those places, especially looking back on it last night, journaling on it. I went and looked at some old emails and whatnot. This is a place where that young naivete was in full effect, because by the time this happened, I had been, living abroad for a year, living in some pretty extreme conditions for about a year. And I was tired. I was ready to come home. And when I got that message of, no, you don't qualify for this program, despite all of my teachers and all the people that had been helping me from the US saying, yeah, it's not going to be a problem. Just go. Like you're fine. We're going to take care of this. I felt like I had been abandoned. I felt like I had been kind of betrayed. I had this plan the whole time. And based on how tired I was and how lonely I was, and the fact that there was this woman that I was in love with that was back in the United States, I basically gave up and decided to come home. Now, going back and looking at the emails, my original plan was not to give up. It was to come back to the States and continue to study with one of my teachers and get some money so that I could go back to India or go back to Tibet and continue studying. And that never happened. And looking back at those emails, there were people that told me, don't come back, because if you do, it's going to be really hard to get back to Asia. And I just went, no, I know what I'm doing, and came back. And again, this is important because I came back and came to Arizona, where this woman lived, and we moved in together, and we eventually got married. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know what happens next. We were married from 2008 to almost 2019. And a lot of intense, traumatic stuff happened. And I don't want to go too far into that, but at the beginning of 2018, I took inventory. We had just tried to go to marriage counseling, didn't stick. I decided I wanted to go back to therapy. I also decided I was going to start meditating again, because I had stopped doing it about a year into coming back to the States. I basically just almost like took a right turn and went back into this mundane life. Partially because, the my ex was like, hey, you're not a Dharma bum anymore. Like, you're back in America. You need to get a job. And so I started working at Trader Joe's, and I was like, cool, I'm going to do this. I'm going to become a manager. I'm going to make a living. And over time I stopped meditating. And anyway, here I am back in 2018 going, why did I stop doing this? And I made a commitment to myself that I was going to start meditating every day. And by the end of 2018, between the therapy and the meditation, I ended up leaving this marriage that was very, it was broken. It was dysfunctional. It was abusive. It had gone on a lot longer than it should have. And another factor that led to that decision was several high dose mushroom experiences that I had, and the insights and experiences that I had there, especially right before I left. A big part of the journey, and I can go back in my journal and look at this. I journaled like the next day after this really pivotal mushroom experience. And it was very, very clear that like I needed to let go of this relationship that wasn't serving me. It was past time. The truth is that I was terrified. I was terrified because I was going to college and working full time, and my job was paying for that college. And my boss was my ex-wife's best friend. And so I was completely terrified that not only would I be losing the financial security of, being in a marriage and sharing expenses and having a place to live and all that stuff. But that as soon as I did something against the family, quote unquote, that I was going to possibly lose my job, lose the tuition reimbursement, and that it wasn't safe to leave. My plan for several years, and I wasn't being honest, obviously, with my ex-wife about this, but my plan was I just got to get through school and then I can leave, because I don't think it can work if I'm on my own. And by the way, all that stuff that I was like afraid of, well, maybe not all of it, but a lot of that stuff came true. I was terminated in a very shady, weird way. They kept paying for the college, by the way, which was great. But yeah, like my financial security and my job was threatened by this dysfunctional, abusive situation. And, there's been multiple people that I worked with that urged me when it happened to go to human resources to file a wrongful termination lawsuit. At the time, again, here's my pattern is I get so worn down that I would rather walk away and have my peace of mind than continue to fight against a rising tide. And so I just said, you know what? I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to get into this thing with this Fortune 500 company. I'm just going to walk away. And that walking away really led into everything that I'm doing now. Because even though the situation was abusive, even though it was not a good fit, even though I should have left a lot sooner than I did, I had the consciousness or the clarity to pause and go, you know what? You're a part of this too. You're not a victim. At the very least, you're not just a victim. And you need to go fix your shit. You need to clean up your backyard. You need to go like figure some stuff out before you get into another relationship, before you take another step. Go fix your shit, because I don't want to end up in this situation again. I don't know how to deal with what I'm going through and what I feel, and I want to. And that led me into more intentional psychedelics. That led me to discover breath work. Ultimately, it led me into what I'm doing right now. I can draw a direct correlation. And there's been these times in the past few years, especially early on during that first year of being separated, where it was almost like I was on this path, right, that took me from selling insurance and DJing in LA across country and then across the world. And I had this mission to become a translator that I let go of. I came back and I started just sort of living this normal, quote unquote, life where I wasn't practicing. Even though my main teacher lives in Arizona, out of 10 years of marriage, neither my ex-wife nor I went up to see him, even though we were both students. Weird. And so it was almost like I was on this one path, one trajectory, and then it took a right turn, or I hit pause on it to go be married and have a career and whatever I was thinking. When I look at it now, I think that a lot of those decisions were driven by fear. I think that a lot of those decisions were driven by unaddressed trauma, things that I hadn't really worked through yet. Another facet of my perspective on this, besides for all the stuff that I've healed, is that after the first time I sat with ayahuasca, it was like a few weeks afterwards, I had this vision where that same teacher, the one that was like, hey, you should become a translator. And hey, you like girls? I think you're going to be a nice girl. All that stuff. And, said basically the same thing to my ex-wife, about me. He came to me. I had this vision and I was stone cold sober. But he came to me and he was laughing. He's like, do you get it now? You get it? So yeah, I always had this question or this, interest in like, wow, what did he know back in 2005? Could he see the whole thing happening? Is this just a part of my karma and it was necessary for me to get to this point where I'm talking to you? And I don't know. But when I had that vision, it was like, okay, yeah, this is all part of a bigger picture. This is all part of a bigger scheme that you don't have all the visibility to. And in a way, it was like hitting pause and then coming back to this path, to this journey, except it's 20 years later and it's not exactly the same. I don't want to become a translator anymore. Even if I did, there's a lot of directional change that I would have to make in order to make that happen. But I've been so grateful over the past few years, especially to have my Buddhist practice, so that I can, have something to like have a framework, have a context for some of the medicine experiences that I've had, to be able to process some of the transpersonal and the non-dualistic experiences that I've had in the medicine space. So yeah, there's been these transpersonal experiences that have happened, during ayahuasca ceremonies or mushroom journeys, other medicine experiences, breath work. And, my Buddhist practice has given me a framework and some context to experience those and understand them. Also, like looking back on it and journaling last night, reflecting, I've come a long way as far as, my ability to communicate, my nervous system threshold and capacity to be able to hold some of these adverse experiences that I went through, including some of the ones where I've, the main experience where I like threw up my hands and said, that's it, I'm done. We're out. I'm going home. Can't do this anymore. The boundaries that I have for myself and being able to communicate those. But that's the way that I look at it, is that I hit pause, and in a way, coming out of this marriage, coming back to doing inner work on myself first and being interested in healing and, spiritual practice, and then ultimately being able to support myself and share that with others, is a part of that journey. Just because there was this weird, like 20-year gap in the middle where I did something else, doesn't make it any less valid. I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea of what's right or what's wrong or what we'd like to happen. And when things don't work out exactly that way, we might think that something's wrong, but all the pieces matter. Everything is happening for a reason. And when I look back at it now, I can see that. So, wow, 100 episodes, incredible. Yeah, I'll leave you with one good story from this time, and I just mentioned it, like the night that I said, that's it, I'm going home. I had already received the rejection email from the program in India when this happened. That's my recollection, is that I'd already gotten rejected and they had said, hey, stay in Tibet for another couple of years and study, or come to this other program that I didn't have money for in India. I was at the monastery. It was like we were on break. You know, I was teaching English at the school in the monastery a couple of days a week, but the school was on break. And this particular person that, you know, I had worked with a lot came and said, hey, we're gonna go take pictures of the kids in this other village, because that was something I had done a few times. It's how I ended up in some of these really crazy remote places. Was I would go and take pictures of all the kids that lived in these villages for, you know, sponsors and people that were supporting Garchen Rinpoche's programs over the world. So he shows up at my door and he's like, hey, we're going to go to this village, get your stuff. Let's go. And I said, okay, are we coming back tonight? And he said, yeah. And I said, are you sure? Are we coming back tonight? Because that's going to change how I pack. It's going to change the cold weather clothes that I bring. I don't mind if we stay overnight, but I need to know so that I know how to pack. And he said, oh yeah, we're going to come back tonight for sure. Well, we had been in this village for less than an hour when I realized we're not coming back. You know, I love Tibetan people. Tibetan people are amazing. They work on a different timetable than Americans. There's no sense of urgency. There's no hurry or hustle. It's very laid back. There's not any sort of accountability to time or a schedule. So we were going to hang out in this village overnight. Okay, great. Not happy about that, but whatever. I'm cold. My ears were cold, especially. I remember I didn't bring a hat with me, and my ears were just like freezing. Like if you've ever been out in, you know, really cold, and it's like almost like there's like a icicle drilling into your ears. That's how it felt. Anyway, we're having dinner. We're in this, I don't know, like the village leader's house. There's this huge fire in the middle of the room. So at least I'm warm. I had been bugging the guy that was helping me. He was supposed to take me back to that initial place, to Xining, which is about a day's drive, a little bit more than 24 hours. And we were supposed to be leaving at the end of the week. And so we're sitting there, we're eating dinner. We're in this warm room. And I said, so we're leaving on Friday. Yeah. And he goes, what? No. I'm like, okay, well, when are we leaving? Oh yeah. Like 2 weeks. Can't take you back for 2 weeks. And mind you, I had checked in with this guy multiple times. Like, we're leaving at the end of the week, right? We're leaving at the end of the week, right? Oh yeah. So I was really upset. I didn't have 2 weeks to wait. So now I'm like, fine, I got to figure out how to get down this mountain, get back to the nearest civilization, figure things out, because I am not waiting. This is BS. But at least I'm in this warm room with this big fire, eating, and okay, right? We finish eating. And he goes, okay, we're going to go to bed. Let's go to the room. And I'm like, wait, what's wrong with this room? This is perfect. He's like, no, like, we're going to sleep in the shrine room. This is a big honor. This is really special. Nobody gets to do this. This is how it's being sold to me, right? I'm like, okay. So we go from this room with this big roaring fire in the middle. It's warm, it's toasty, it's beautiful. Out into this shrine room that has no heat, no fire, and has been sitting unoccupied all day and all night and is freezing. And I'm like, what the hell? Now, in case you've never been around Tibetan people, I'm 6'2". I am quite the bit taller than most. So they get me like this bed, which doesn't really fit. And they give me this blanket that was like this, it's like this horse blanket. It was really, really thick. I had like a Dickies jacket, you know, the kind where it has the blanket lining on the inside. It was like that kind of blanket. Great. Blanket's good, except that I'm so tall that this blanket either covers my head and not my feet, or my feet and not my head. So I literally take the blanket, put it over my feet, take my jacket off and put it over my head, because otherwise I'm going to be too cold to actually fall asleep in this room. I don't fall asleep for hours. I am just laying there seething. I'm so angry. I'm so upset. I feel so powerless. I finally drift off. And I wake up and my first thought was, it's morning and somebody's like poking me to get up. Nope. There was a cat-sized rat. Let me say that again. A cat-sized rat. You know, a rat the size of a small cat. On top of my head. Now, fortunately, there's this, you know, jacket over my head, right? And when I realized that was the final straw, I'm like, that's it. Literally on the spot. I'm done. I'm going home. And it didn't help that I got up in the morning and I was telling the people that, you know, we were staying with about this, and they just thought it was the funniest thing ever. So they're sitting there laughing at my trauma, laughing at my experience. And I'm like, that's it. I'm freaking out of here. I'm going back. I can't do it. So death by 1,000 cuts, not having proper planning or financial resources or the patience or communication skills to want to stick this out for another couple of years. Definitely not the nervous system resiliency to stick it out for a couple of years. So I came back, and that's where I'll leave it now. But, you know, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this was valuable. You know, this was a little bit different, but also, you know, another reason that I wanted to do this episode for episode 100 is one of the changes that I've been wanting to make is figuring out how to start adding in these integration journal episodes. And if you watch the show on YouTube, at the beginning of the year, beginning of 2024, I had this great idea that I was going to start doing these like vlog episodes that were less teaching or, you know, sharing integration and more about my own personal experience and my own integration and the things that I'm like working on. Cause I'm not just a facilitator. I'm also on this path. I'm also a practitioner. So I have 3 episodes. They were not ever put into audio. I want to put them into audio. I want to keep doing more integration episodes. So in a way, this is like my introduction to you, so that I can get those older episodes onto the audio platform and continue to, you know, do more episodes, and it won't seem super strange. So that being said, if you enjoyed this episode, if you would like to hear more stories of my time in Tibet, let me know. Because I veered off of the beaten path a little bit. So getting feedback helps me to know how to proceed. And I'm going to do another little mini episode where I'm talking about the changes that I want to make and some of the things that I have planned for this next chapter of the podcast, post episode 100. But I'm going to save that for another time. So thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already, make sure that you're signed up for the email list. You can do that at bluemagicelevate.com. That's bluemagicelevate.com. Not only will you be added to the email list, you'll also get a free mini guide to using breathwork for integration and 3 weeks of breathwork sessions online you'll get a trial membership to our online breathwork community. So lots of opportunities to drop in with us and check out how breathwork can benefit you, how it can transform your life. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, it's not about the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. It's not the destination. The journey is much more important. And I'm really grateful that we're doing this journey together. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing, because that's the vital point.